Welcome back. This is episode 3 of Coffee and Conversations. Guest today is Louis Foreman. Mr. Foreman was actually my professor of entrepreneurship at Queen's University of Charlotte, and that's how I was able to get connected with him in the first place. But he's started or helped start many businesses, and hopefully we'll get into some of that here in a little bit. Thank you for joining us again. I really appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Today we are drinking an Ethiopia Yirgacheffe from Pure Intentions. Coffee we just got in last week. It's got some nice tropical fruit sweetness, and I brewed it on the AeroPress, so it's got a nice full body, which is kind of unique for a lighter roast. But I don't know, hopefully you enjoy it.
Coffee's great. I've already tried it, and it's wonderful.
Excellent. Now you started your first business when you were still in college. Is that correct?
That's right. I was a sophomore at the University of Illinois, and I played lacrosse.
Okay.
We didn't have a local supplier of equipment, and back then in the 80s, there was no internet. You couldn't just go on Amazon and order what you needed. Everything was done through mail order catalogs. So while taking an econ class, I learned about supply and demand, realized that when there's demand for a product and no one fulfilling that demand, there should be a business opportunity. So I started my first company.
What was that like as a 20-year-old, right? Sophomore, 20, 19?
Yeah, I was 19 years old at the time.
Did a bunch of your friends think you were crazy, or were they too busy, going to the bar and having fun, and they didn't really see what you were doing?
Yeah, a little bit of both. The first person that I talked to about starting a business thought I was crazy and didn't want to have anything to do with it. Then I grabbed another fraternity brother who had some interest in it, and I convinced him to invest $500 along with my $500, and our business was off and going.
That's really cool. That's a pretty low startup cost, though.
You've got to be scrappy when you're an entrepreneur. You got to figure out how to kind of bootstrap your business. Back then, being in school, we didn't really have a lot of overhead. We were running the business out of our fraternity room, so most of our expense was inventory related.
And you were screen printing T-shirts mainly, right?
That was later on. The first year, all we did was sell lacrosse equipment. We would buy the equipment from the manufacturers. We printed a catalog, distributed the catalog to teams all throughout the area. Those orders would come in. We'd place the orders and fulfill those orders. But eventually, we diversified, getting into screen printed apparel as well.
Now, when you were growing up, before you were 19 and starting a business in your fraternity, was entrepreneurship something you always kind of had in mind for the future, or were you on a career track? What were you majoring in?
Sure. Well, I don't think that they really looked at it as entrepreneurship, when you were a kid. It was more like you had a lemonade stand or a backyard carnival,
right,
or you did something that, kept you busy and maybe you earned a little bit of money along the way. When I went to the University of Illinois, I thought I was going to be a doctor. So talk about a major career trajectory change. But my degree is in economics, and I just was drawn to starting my own business and really being able to control my own destiny.
So in a traditional sense, have you ever had a real job?
The only real job that I've ever had was when I was in high school. I scooped ice cream. I worked at Baskin-Robbins for a year, and that, I think, taught me a lot about good customer service and also what you don't want to do when you get older.
Yeah, that's scooping ice cream. That's really interesting. Do you think entrepreneurship is something that people are naturally kind of directed towards, or is it more of they just are opportunistic?
Well, I think entrepreneurs have this ability to manage risk and reward. They look at an opportunity and they have to be able to quickly assess whether or not there's enough value for assuming that risk. And there are people out there who want to be entrepreneurs, but they just can't get comfortable with the unknown, with the assumption of risk, in a situation. And in many cases, they're much better off working for somebody else who takes on that risk. Entrepreneurs, have these skills. They have tools that they use to be successful. But ultimately, an entrepreneur has to be willing to trade, a certain amount of risk for the upside that they're going after.
So for you, when you were in college, what do what was the risk? What was the risk for you, other than the $500 that you and your buddy both put in?
Right. Well, being in college, there's much lower risk than there is after you've got kids and a mortgage and car payments and a lot more overhead. So the risks were relatively low in college because, look, the worst thing that could have happened is if my business wasn't successful, I would graduate, I'd get a real job like all my other, friends in college, and I could just, kind of write off that as an experience of college. On the other hand, because the overhead was low in college, it allowed me to try something out that I probably wouldn't have done later in life. The risk could have been reputational, so no one likes to fail at something that they're doing. There was certainly the loss of the $500 per person, but there's also the opportunity cost. So what would I have been doing instead of running my own business? Would I have advanced my studies? Would I have interned or interviewed for another job? So there are certain risks associated with starting a business at any time in your life.
Now, how did you manage being a new business owner as well as a college athlete, as well as just a college kid in general, with the social life and kind of finding your feet on your own?
My college experience was different. So when my fraternity brothers were going out to parties or after classes, hanging out at the bar, I was running a business. And so there was definitely less free time to partake in a lot of the social aspects, but at the same time, it was a very well-rounded experience. I still was able to play 4 years of college lacrosse. I was still able to have a good social life in college, but maybe my studies took a little bit of a backseat. Something had to give.
Yeah, we kind of joke about it with my friends because I played golf at Queens, and you can be really good at golf, you can be really good at school, or you can be really good at this other thing, which is for many people a social life. You can't really do all three of them. You can do two of them really, really well. You can't really do all three of them and be successful. If you hadn't have turned that first business venture into something successful, what do you think would have happened?
That's a good question, and I'm not really sure what the answer is. I think I've always had a inclination to do my own thing. I don't know if I'd ever be a good employee for somebody else because I like to kind of run the show myself. So I think I would have ended up starting some other business. I would have learned from the experience of that first failure, if it would have been a failure, and done something differently.
What was the second thing you did?
So the lacrosse equipment migrated into screen printed apparel.
Okay.
We were doing a lot of contract manufacturing to other screen printers in the area. So we were focused on the lacrosse equipment. We would send the blank t-shirts to a local screen printer. They would print the shirts and send them back. And then I realized that there was a lot of margin that we were leaving on the table. So my junior year in college, I went out and bought all the screen printing equipment, set up an operation, and started printing myself. And that was really a turning point, an inflection point in our business, because at that point we controlled all of the variables. We were no longer at the mercy of when a printer could get something done for us. We could turn orders quicker. We could invest in higher quality equipment and do better graphics. And that's really when our business started to take off.
Now, how long was it just you and your buddy?
Yeah, it was myself and a fraternity brother. As our business grew, obviously, we started hiring employees. By the time I left college, that business that I started in my fraternity room was 150 employees. We had 80,000 square feet of manufacturing space. We were producing probably on average 4 or 5 million t-shirts every single year. So it was a big operation.
Now, were you still ordering like blank t-shirts from other manufacturers, or were you doing everything at that point?
We were doing a lot of different things. Not only were we buying blank garments from brands, but we also had our own branded t-shirt that we would have manufactured for us. We were doing printing for local businesses, fraternities and sororities, but also for major companies like Nike and Reebok and Logo Athletic and Starter and a number of other companies. We were doing a lot of contract manufacturing as well.
That's, man, as a 22, 23-year-old kid when you graduated?
At that point, probably 20, 21.
20, yeah. How was the reception from these other bigger brands that you're dealing with?
Well, in the early years, it was difficult to get, I think, credit for having this business and being a 19 or 20-year-old kid. And so, I hate to admit it, but we created a fictitious owner of the business. His name was Brad Davis. There is no Brad Davis. But when we were talking with big companies, it was easy just to defer those decisions. Well, I got to check with Brad.
You got to check with Brad.
See what he says.
Did you ever get called out on the bluff? Did anyone ever ask to speak to Brad?
Oh, sure. We would get phone calls for Brad. Back then, there weren't cell phones yet, so and there was no internet, there was no email, so everything was done, either on pay phones or corded phones. We would get, we had an answering service, and so people would call the answering service, and no matter who they asked for, that person was in a meeting. And so then we would be paged on our digital pagers, and then we would know to call in and get the message.
It's a different world.
Yeah, I'll tell you, technology has made it much easier today for people to start companies to look like they're a bigger company, even though they may just be a one-person operation.
Yeah, and that's kind of, you actually referred another kid to me like a week ago, maybe, who was doing a project. He reached out to you, and you sent him my direction.
Right, another student at Queens.
Yeah, and that's what I told him, is that, this day and age, with technology, it's much easier to get something started and get something off the ground than I imagine it was, back when you started the apparel company.
Yeah, well, the information is all accessible now, at your fingertips. You can create, an image for your business that doesn't necessarily reflect the actual size of your operation. You can look like a huge company and be operating it out of your apartment.
And just out of curiosity, what did your parents do?
My dad worked for the same company for 25 years.
Okay.
He was in marketing. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. So the entrepreneurial bug wasn't, flying around our house. I was really the first in the family to do something different. And at first my parents were a little concerned. They sent me to college. They thought I would get a real job like everybody else. And so, part of my motivation was to prove that I had made the right decision.
Did you face any resistance from family or otherwise?
I don't know if it was resistance as much as it was a certain amount of skepticism or concern. But as the business took off and they saw that I was successful, all of that resistance, quickly, faded away.
So when you graduated college, what was your next move?
So after graduating, I stayed in college, or stayed in Champaign, Illinois, for a few more years to grow the business. My first child was born, I got married, and then I saw an opportunity in NASCAR. NASCAR was a growing sport. There was a lot of fan popularity around it. There weren't any major brands involved in NASCAR apparel. And so in 1995, I sold the company that I had started in Illinois. I moved here to Charlotte, set up a new operation. I brought a dozen of my best employees with me from Illinois. And by November of 95, we were up and running, and we had a successful NASCAR apparel business going.
And that was exclusive, if I remember correctly, yeah? You had like an exclusive partnership with NASCAR? Or?
No, we didn't have to necessarily negotiate with NASCAR. We negotiated with the individual teams.
Okay.
So we would print for Dale Earnhardt. This was Dale Earnhardt Sr., for Rusty Wallace, for Jeff Gordon, for Mark Martin, all of the popular drivers back in the 90s. And it was a very quickly growing business. Within 2 years, we were doing nearly $20 million in sales.
That is a lot of growth in a very short amount of time. When did you turn your attention into inventing and then connecting inventors with other businesses?
So after 2 years with the NASCAR apparel business, I sold the company to a public company in '97. That was the exit that I was looking for, and I took some time off to kind of reflect and decide what I wanted to do next. And what I was really intrigued by was intellectual property. And so intellectual property is patents, trademarks, trade secrets. Most of the IP or intellectual property in the apparel business was around trademarks and copyrights. But this concept of getting a patent, which prevents others from making, using, or selling what you've created for 20 years, was intriguing. And so I saw a technology that had been used in the medical industry. It was used for splinting and casting, and I found the owner of this technology and adopted it into sports protective products, soccer shin guards, baseball forearm guards, batter's leg guards, and so built a business around that, filed a number of patents, licensed those patents off to companies like Nike and Adidas, and that's really when I started to get serious about inventing and innovation. And what I realized here in Charlotte was there weren't the local resources that I needed to design, to engineer, to develop those products. And so that was the next business, Enventys.
Okay.
And so I thought, if the resources don't exist, if there's demand for a service like this and no one's supplying it, there's a business opportunity. And so I started Enventys in 2001.
Is there a reason you chose to stay in Charlotte?
Well, Charlotte's a great place to live, great climate. We've got a tremendous airport here, so I can, I travel every single week, but I can get from Charlotte to pretty much anywhere in the country direct, through this airport. So I found Charlotte to be a very good place for a business.
It's interesting. Charlotte doesn't necessarily have a reputation of being like a hub of innovation, like a San Francisco might. But I feel like there are a few different companies, and you were a part of that for sure, where people are looking at Charlotte as a good place to start a business.
Charlotte is not one of the first cities you think of when you think about innovation and entrepreneurship. And part of that is because, Charlotte's somewhat risk averse. Most of the industries that really have made Charlotte what it is are banking, healthcare, energy. They're very low risk businesses. And so as a result, there's just not a lot of angel investing activity in Charlotte. There haven't been many big liquidity events. You don't really hear a lot about big companies from Charlotte that went public, and all of a sudden there's hundreds or thousands of people running around town, who are now millionaires, like what you would have in Seattle, right? When Amazon went public, when Microsoft went public, all of a sudden employees who had been with the company for a number of years all of a sudden had a lot of available capital, and they went off and started their own companies, or they became angel investors, or they started VC firms. We haven't had that yet in Charlotte.
Do you think that that's in the future, or do you think Charlotte still has, some cultural shifting to do in order to have that environment?
It's definitely getting better. 22 years ago when I moved to Charlotte and I told people I was an entrepreneur, they looked at me and thought, okay, he probably isn't smart enough to work at the bank. Today, entrepreneurship has a little bit more credibility to it, but we still have a long way to go. And I think what we need to do as a society, as a community, is we have to celebrate those successes, the successful entrepreneurs who go out and risk everything. We've got to celebrate their successes, but also, not chastise them if they fail, because failure is part of the entrepreneurial journey, and there's going to be failure along the way. We can't run people out of town because they failed at something. We can't mark them with a scarlet letter because they reached a little bit too far. Most really successful entrepreneurs have failed once, twice, multiple times. They learn from those failures and they become better entrepreneurs as a result.
How do you convey that in a class setting? Because how long have you taught entrepreneurship at Queens?
So at Queens, I've been teaching entrepreneurship there for, I believe it's 6 or 7 years. Okay. It's been a while, but I've been teaching entrepreneurship at other universities for 15 plus years.
So how do you provide like an accurate representation that isn't really available in a classroom setting?
Well, I took my first entrepreneurship class when I was in college at the University of Illinois, and believe it or not, back in the late 80s, entrepreneurship wasn't even offered to undergrads. It was a class that was, part of their master's program. And so I was able to petition to take that class because I'd already started a business. And what I was surprised by and quite honestly disappointed by is that my professor had never started a business. He had a book that he taught from. He taught entrepreneurial theory, but he'd never assumed any risk. He was a tenured professor who got a paycheck, every 2 weeks, and had never really known what it would be like to start his own business. What I learned from that class were the entrepreneurs who came in and spoke. So he would bring in local entrepreneurs, local business owners who had started the business, and that's what really inspired me to grow my own business, because I realized there wasn't really anything special about these individuals. They just did something. They didn't talk about it, they did it. And so that's what I've tried to bring in the classes that I've taught over the years, is the real life experiences that entrepreneurs have gone through to be successful.
If you could design a curriculum for a class in like a perfect scenario where you're not confined by schedule or resources or time, what would that look like for an entrepreneurship class?
Right. Well, part of that experience is learning the tools that entrepreneurs use to be successful. It's assessing the feasibility of an idea. It's being able to, do the financial projections necessary to determine whether or not the idea is actually financially, viable or not. But it's also about putting your idea to work and going out there and trying it out, building a prototype or building out a test model to see whether or not there's actual demand. It's market research to figure out whether or not people will actually do business with you and at the price point that you think your product or service should be sold at. So it should be somewhat experiential, but also you've got to master the skills that entrepreneurs use to be successful.
Rewind back to your college days. At what point did you realize that the business you started in the fraternity, that would become successful, sustainable?
Well, fortunately, we had low overhead, so we didn't have an expensive building, and we didn't have a staff. Everything that we did, was based on what we sold. So we'd sell some equipment, we'd buy the equipment. We didn't have very much inventory. The risk was relatively low. But the turning point for our business was when we got into apparel, because the margins were much higher. We could sell to a much broader customer base than we could. When you're selling lacrosse equipment, you're selling to lacrosse players. When you're selling screen printed apparel, you're pretty much selling to anybody.
Yeah. And having a very defined market is good for when you're starting, I think. I feel like
you've got to have some focus.
Yeah.
Too many times, entrepreneurs or inventors, for that matter, think that what they have is marketable to everyone. And so instead of being very narrowly focused on who the perfect customer is, they try to sell everything to everyone.
And that's something I imagine you've run into a lot with working with inventors, is that people get very into their own ideas and their own inventions, and they think that it's the end-all be-all for everything.
People believe that their baby is beautiful,
Yeah.
even if that's not the case. And so sometimes they need a little bit of a dose of reality to convince them otherwise. Or sometimes they just work really hard at it to prove that that's the case.
What do you think the difference is between people that just have these ideas when they're, taking a shower or something, and then the people that you talked about, that there wasn't anything special other than the fact that they went and executed on these ideas?
Yeah, well, I think you nailed it right there. It's the execution. So coming up with the idea, that's easy. Following through with the idea, that's what separates kind of the people who toy with it and the people who actually play with it. And so the execution unlocks the value in an idea, whether it's an idea for a business, whether it's an idea for a product. It's the follow-through. It's developing the prototype. It's doing the market research. It's making that financial investment and the investment of time as well. That's where you become successful.
Trying to process that for a second. How do you foster an environment of innovation and entrepreneurship in the organizations that you've built?
Right. Having a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship, I think, is critical in any business. Today, the market is changing so rapidly, and if companies are not thinking about the future, if they're not looking at new innovative products and services to deliver to their customers, they run the risk of being disrupted. We live in an era now where the disruptors are at the door. Every industry is at risk to be completely eliminated. Whether you're Blockbuster thinking, wow, we've got 10,000 stores, we're the biggest video rental chain in the country, and then all of a sudden realize that people don't want to come into stores. They want to stream it, or they want it sent to their mailbox, or they want to be able to go to a kiosk at any hour of the day and get what they're looking for. Blockbuster had the ability to pivot their business model, but they were in denial. They just assumed that everyone would want to continue to do business the way they had prescribed business should be done. And so that's what every company needs to be looking at, is how do you continuously evolve and innovate within your company to prevent you from being disrupted.
Sure.
Amazon at one point just sold books, but today we know Amazon for its ability to sell just about everything, and they continue to innovate.
You talked about having a culture that involves innovation. How would you describe your culture? Do you have like a set of values for Enventys?
Well, what we want our employees to do is be able to take risk, to be able to kind of broaden their horizon and go out, beyond where they're normally comfortable. And we do that by allowing them to fail. So it's okay if someone tries something and they're not successful with it, as long as they learn something from it, and we can kind of process what happened and figure out, can we do it better the next time? So we give our employees a certain amount of latitude to try new things, to propose new ideas. We also, are always open to new concepts, new ways of doing things, and we continuously kind of remake our business to adapt to the changes in the business environment. Just recently, we started doing more digital marketing for our business because we realized that traditional forms of marketing of products has changed, and we see crowdfunding as not only a great way to launch products, but a great way to determine consumer demand.
As you develop these businesses, I imagine that you're developing yourself. I mean, you were only 19 at the time when you started. Do you think entrepreneurs are naturally good leaders, and or vice versa? Is a good leader somebody who could be a successful entrepreneur, or are they completely independent?
Well, I think good entrepreneurs have to have a certain level of vision. Now, whether they can lead with that vision or they surround themselves with the right people who can kind of rally the troops around them, different people have different skill sets. What entrepreneurs need to do is they need to make sure that they surround themselves with the people that complement their skills. So if the entrepreneur is a great operations person, they've come up with a great way of making something or delivering something, they need to make sure that they've got someone with them who can sell that product or service. And vice versa, if the entrepreneur is a great salesperson and is really passionate about what they do, but they don't like running the day-to-day operations of the business, they need to make sure that they find those people as well.
So would you say you're more an advocate of finding somebody else to kind of fill in areas of weakness, or do you think that you should develop yourself to be well-rounded?
I think it's much better to find people who've got the right skills. So I don't like to manage. I like to build. I like to grow. I like to find new opportunities for our company, but I don't want to run the day-to-day operations. So I've surrounded myself with really great partners, really great employees that are great at running the day-to-day operations of the business, that will focus on the finance, that will focus on the project management, that will focus on the design, the engineering work that's got to be done. Those individuals would probably say, I don't want to be the guy who travels every single week and sells what we do.
Right.
They're probably the ones that don't want to come up with the new concept, the new game-changing business model that is going to allow the company to grow. So that's why you want to find those complementary skills.
Was there ever a time when you were first starting out that you were not sure that it was going to be successful? Or you mentioned having low overhead when you started up. Was there ever a time where you weren't confident that this was going to happen? And then what did you do during those times that like reinforce your decision to start this business?
I think every day there's a certain amount of doubt.
Yeah.
You know, are we headed in the right direction? Have we become too complacent? Should we be going faster? Should we be going slower? Entrepreneurs, I think, are constantly assessing the current situation. I don't think there's ever been a time where I felt so comfortable that I would take my eyes off the wheel.
To this day.
To this day.
To this day.
30 years later.
So looking forward, what are your goals for Enventys and other companies that you're involved with? And then what are your goals personally?
Well, the goal with Enventys is to continue to grow the business. We merged with a company called Command Partners in August of 2016. We've changed our name to Enventys Partners, and that brought a new resource to the company that we'd never had before, and that's the digital marketing. Command Partners was the largest crowdfunding marketing agency in the country. They'd done more million-dollar crowdfunding campaigns than any other firm out there, and it was a very complementary business to what we were doing on the product design and engineering side. So that was a great opportunity to evolve the businesses, to focus on an emerging area, a new way to bring products to market. And so far it's been a very successful relationship. But we're not done with that. We're always looking for new resources, new markets to expand into. We opened up an office out on the West Coast, outside of San Diego a couple of years ago. That's doing really well. We've got great people out there running that office and growing that office. And we're in communications now with some groups about opening up offices outside of the U.S. as well.
What about personally? Do you have goals outside of business aspirations, or is that kind of dominating your focus right now?
I have a very well-rounded life between business and family and kind of personal time. I'm living a dream that, I'm not sure that I would do any differently. Fortunately, we're able to, mentor great employees and watch them grow within our organization. We're able to help entrepreneurs launch their first business or their second business or their third business and give them the tools and the resources to be successful. And I think we do a lot from an education standpoint, whether it's the classes that we teach or the educational materials that we create online. We've hopefully inspired and educated people to either start a business or realize that now's not the right time to do it.
Okay, that's interesting. You say that now's not the right time to do it. What I've always thought of now is like always the right time to get started on something. What do you mean by now is not the right time to do something?
Well, it may be that the market hasn't evolved enough to buy that product or service that you're thinking about, or maybe in the life cycle of a product, maybe it's too late to get into a market because it's already saturated by others, especially if you didn't have something that was really different than what's already out there. Maybe you're waiting for technology to get to the point where it would be easier to actually distribute. I'm not necessarily talking about waiting 10 years or 20 years, but sometimes entrepreneurs are in such a hurry to get to the destination that they don't really think about what's necessary to make sure that it's a good journey.
I want to get back to that, but first I want to go off on a little tangent. How did you get involved with the television opportunities you've had, specifically with Edison Nation?
Right.
Or Everyday Edisons, sorry.
So back in 2005, we were getting so many inventors coming to our company with ideas. They'd wake up in the middle of the night with a great idea. They wouldn't necessarily know what to do with it. They'd find us, and they would come to us and say, here's my idea, but I don't want to hire you. I don't want to risk my kids' college education to pursue it. I'm not looking to quit my job, but I still think I've got a good idea. Can you help me? And many of the ideas that we looked at weren't that great of ideas. In fact, if they would have done a quick search online, they would have found that something very similar to it already existed. We were trying to find a good way to educate people on the process of invention. Back in the early 2000s, you saw these TV commercials with these invention scam companies that told you that you can make a lot of money from your invention. They charge you a lot of money to develop it, and we didn't want people to get caught in that trap. So we were trying to come up with a good way to educate people. And in the early 2000s, reality TV was this new media. It was a new way to teach people to sing or dance or cook or fashion. But no one had done anything around innovation yet. There was no Shark Tank yet. And so in 2005, we had this crazy idea that we should create a reality show around invention. And so that's what we did. We had our first casting call here in Charlotte. Hundreds of people lined up to pitch their ideas to us. We looked at the ideas, realized there were some good ones there. And then we subsequently went to South Carolina, to Tennessee, to Florida, and to Georgia, did casting calls there as well, and then launched the first season of Everyday Edisons in 2007.
Is that something that you produce completely independently, or did you approach studios to kind of bring you guys on board?
So initially we did it independently with a partnership with the local PBS station here in Charlotte, WTVI, with the understanding that if we did these casting calls, WTVI would air the show. Once we started going, PBS nationally liked the idea of the show, and so they picked it up. And so in the first season of Everyday Edisons, we were in 92% of the U.S. market. So almost every PBS station across the country was airing the show. That season, we won 2 Emmys for the show, and we went on to produce 4 seasons of the show, 52 episodes. As I said, 2 Emmys, and that kind of led to us moving all of it online to Edison Nation.
Yeah. Is television something you want to be involved with more in the future, or was that kind of just a good platform for the time for kind of the mission that you guys had?
Yeah, I have no aspirations to be on TV. So the TV show was a great way to spread the information. But eventually we realized that, as people had more internet access and broadband access at their home, they didn't necessarily need to watch a PBS show to get this information. They could get it from an online community. So in 2009, we created Edison Nation as this online community where 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you can see those great interviews with guys like Jeff Bezos or James Dyson. You can enter into communities and forums with other inventors and learn from their experiences. You can read, copies of Inventors Digest magazine online, or you could submit an idea to us. And so you didn't have to line up and spend, all day at a casting call in San Diego. All you'd have to do is go to Edison Nation, submit your idea, and we'd review it.
If you were a college kid right now, what do you think you would have done differently, given where technology is and kind of what your interests are?
Well, if the technology today existed back when I started the business, it would have been a lot easier. We would have set up a website instead of printing out a catalog. We would have conducted business through emails and cell phones versus digital pagers and answering services and payphones. But I don't know that I would have done a whole lot differently because, again, it comes down to identifying an opportunity. And so the opportunity was there was demand for lacrosse equipment and there wasn't someone locally providing it. The demand was that, getting quick turnaround for screen printed t-shirts didn't exist. And so we fulfilled that demand. And so we looked at situations in the marketplace where the market wasn't fulfilling the needs of consumers, and we came up with better ways of doing it that made customers want to buy from us.
Are there things you learned or experienced in the early days that you look back on still now and say, that was a great experience, or I'm really glad I went through that because I can pull exactly what I needed from that experience when I was 20 years old to now?
I think every experience in business is a learning experience. Whether it was a great experience, where you made a ton of money off of something,
great
and you realized,
or valuable.
Sure, but then there's also failures that have been experienced over the years where you learn something from it. You realize, all right, stay focused and don't get distracted by these side businesses, or maybe that's a category that we should stay away from because there's not as much demand, or you know what, just bringing another product or service to the marketplace isn't enough. You got to figure out how do you differentiate what you have. And today it's a lot more competitive. Almost everything that we need as consumers is out there. So how do you create a product or a service or an experience that's going to make someone not buy something else? I mean, you look at your business. You're selling an experience, you're selling a high quality product, but people can get coffee from a lot of different places, including the gas station across the street. But you've got to give them something special that's going to make them not spend 99 cents for a terrible cup of coffee at a gas station and want to spend more money from your place of business. And so you've come up with higher quality, more diversity, fresher varieties, and a different ambiance than what they're going to get, from a different location.
Getting down to it now, there's a few questions that I've asked everybody so far. The first one being, if you could have a phone call with the 18-year-old version of Lewis Foreman, what advice would you give him?
Wow. Well, certainly buy Amazon, Apple, Google, at the IPO price. Those would be some good advice. But I think the advice I would offer is just, believe in what you're doing. Because if you're really passionate about what you're doing, and if you're willing to be patient, eventually you'll be successful.
Patience is huge, I think, especially in today's world where you can get anything like that, right? Amazon will deliver to your door within 2 hours of you ordering something if you really want them to.
We are definitely impatient. People don't like to wait for things. And, as far as success is concerned, I think we're jaded because we typically hear about these amazing stories of, a couple guys in their dorm room, they start an app and then they sell it to Facebook for $1 billion. And we expect that every entrepreneurial transaction should be that way. And the reality is it's not that way. Most businesses slug it out for years and years and years, and they never see that liquidity event. You just have to understand that, you're doing this, for different reasons. Some people do it for financial reasons. Some people do it because they love the industry or they love the product. Some people do it because they want to control their own destiny. But you've got to make sure that you understand why you're doing it before you get started.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Similar to the last question, if there's an 18-year-old kid out there who says, "Hey, I want to be the next Lewis Foreman," what advice do you give him?
I talk with those 18-year-old kids almost every week, and whether they're students in my class or they're people who seek me out, what I try to instill upon any entrepreneur who comes to me is that the hardest part is coming up with that unique product or service. You've got to come up with something that is going to be different than what's out there because we have so many choices today. The internet has unlocked this vast collection of just about anything that you need. Whether you're looking for a product or you're looking for a service, if you type that in, you're going to find that there's a lot of choices out there. So how do you create something that's going to be different than what's already out there? And once you do it, then you've got to make sure that you can make money doing it. Because just because you have a great product or service doesn't mean people are going to buy it.
What is the best advice that you've ever received?
It's a good question. I don't know that there's ever been one tip that I've received over the years that stands out, that's changed necessarily my path. I would just say that most of what I've heard from others along the way have reaffirmed the direction that I'm headed.
I imagine that as you started a business and as you developed these businesses, you kind of learned how to do things on your own. Did you have a mentor or a series of mentors in your life that kind of helped guide you or point you in a certain direction?
No one particular mentor, but early on, I read as much as I could about other entrepreneurs. So back in the the 80s and the 90s, whether it was Inc. magazine or Fast Company or Forbes or Fortune. What inspired me was the stories of other entrepreneurs who had started a business and had been successful, and that was validation. That was just confirming that, okay, you can do this. You don't have to have some special skill that you go out and buy. It's really more of a matter of just perseverance and sticking with it.
Where do you think things are heading now with technology and the way people's habits are changing? What do you think is going to be the next big thing?
It's happening so quick. It's happening every day. And if you're not reacting, and actually, if you're not proactive, you run the risk that you're going to have to react, and it's going to be too late. We live in a world now where if you're not disrupting an industry, it's just a matter of time before you're disrupted. And so it's a great time for anyone to start a business, to use technology to find a way to make something obsolete. But at the same time, if you're already in business, you got to be thinking about, who's going to change your business model, right out from underneath you.
From a competitive business standpoint, is it? I've kind of always thought of development in two sort of divergent paths. One could either be fighting for a larger piece of that pie within an industry, or the other would be to try to do things to grow the industry so that everybody's piece of the pie is a little bit bigger. Well, where do you stand on that, and what are your thoughts on just in general?
No, it's a good strategy, and if you can grow an industry larger, then you don't necessarily have to fight, for that same segment of the business that's already there. That's obviously the best situation. E-commerce being a great example of it. When Amazon and other e-commerce companies came into the space, they weren't necessarily fighting with each other to take that segment of the market. They kept growing the overall market, and so as the tide rised, other boats, rose along with it. But at the same time, you've got to be careful that you don't, become cannibalistic, where you're not, taking away business, you're introducing new products that just takes other business away from you. You want to always be growing, your overall presence.
I just forgot what I was about to ask. This is kind of my last question, but looking back on what you've accomplished thus far, what are the moments that you've been most proud of?
That's a tough question because I think I'm really hard on myself. I don't know that I've really accomplished what I've set out to accomplish yet. But what I do take pride in is the people that have grown with our company, the entrepreneurs, whether they be customers or students for that matter, that have gone off and started their own businesses, the other companies that have sprung up around things that we've played some role in, whether we provided some services or some angel investing or a little bit of guidance. I think overall there's a better world out there because of entrepreneurs. And we play a really small role in that but we do play a role, and that I think is very rewarding.
Yeah, that's people ask me all the time what is the best part of doing what you do, and I mean, so much of what I do is literally just talking and connecting with people, and it's something that I've found has resonated across many industries.
Yeah. If you can bring joy to people's lives, if you can do things that are great for the environment, if you can do something that brings families together, if you could do something that saves people money. I mean, all of those they come from entrepreneurs. They come from entrepreneurs who are saying there's got to be a better way to do it, and they go out and they venture, they take risk, and hopefully along the way they have a great experience and are able to deliver on that mission.
Well, I've definitely had a great experience with you being on the show, and hopefully a year from now I can have you back on and we can chat about other stuff that's gone on in the meantime. But
well, I'm excited about your business. I'm excited that you took action and you followed through with something. And I think you're in a great opportunity now to just grow your business and use this as a platform to help people, to provide great quality coffee, to educate them on the difference between what they drink across the street versus what they drink here, and hopefully it inspires other people to start businesses.
Yeah, and that's something I've learned. It's like you said, taking action. It's just getting started seems to be the biggest hurdle, but once you get momentum, it definitely very fulfilling to be doing something for yourself. That's about it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, again, thank you. When I had this idea, I was like, I need to email Mr. Foreman, because definitely in class I wish I paid more attention to when I was in college.
Well, hopefully you got the basic elements of it, and
yeah,
that's all. I mean, now you're learning, on the job.
Yeah. I've definitely learned a lot just from doing.